When people discuss a government's finances, they often cite the fiscal deficit and express it in a particular way. Understanding this measure lets you interpret one of the most quoted figures in public finance. The fiscal deficit is essentially a measure of the gap between what a government spends and what it earns over a year, the amount by which spending exceeds revenue, which must be borrowed. It is another way of describing the budget deficit, focused on the overall shortfall the government must finance. The important feature is how it is usually expressed, as a percentage of the country's GDP, the size of its economy. Rather than quoting the deficit as a raw sum of money, economists state it relative to the economy. For example, a deficit of a few percent of GDP. This makes the figure meaningful and comparable because a given amount of money means something very different for a large economy than for a small one. Expressing the deficit this way allows useful comparison across countries of different sizes and for one country over time, since it shows the shortfall in proportion to the economy's capacity to bear it. A deficit that is small relative to a large economy is more manageable than the same sum in a small economy. For example, instead of citing a huge raw sum, economists describe a government shortfall as, say, a few percent of GDP, the fiscal deficit, scaled to the economy so it can be compared meaningfully. Taxes, spending, deficits, and budget rules vary greatly from one country to another, and they change with each government. Public finance involves genuine political debate, so treat these examples as illustrations rather than recommendations, and check what applies where you live. The main lesson is simple. The fiscal deficit is a common measure of how much more a government spends than it earns in a year, usually shown as a percentage of the economy's size, a standard gauge of a country's budget shortfall.